All right, and we back on the forecast. Now, we are at another crossroad in American history right now. Now, we generally agree on a lot of the core issues. But the thing is, we don't have to reinvent the wheel over again. Even just in our history here in America, there are plenty of examples. Our ancestors left us the blueprint. Like with economics, regardless of our beliefs, we practiced group economics and was successful because we had no other choice. Segregation forced them to be millionaires. They didn't have to be encouraged to support black businesses because they had no other choice but to support black businesses. Now, we still don't have a choice. We just think we do. Now, these prosperous black cities were destroyed because they did not learn how to protect themselves. They came in, robbing, killing, looting, burning the whole city to the ground. And whatever cities they didn't burn to the ground, they just built a highway right through the middle of it. Now, of course, we can easily blame ourselves today and call each other lazy and say we don't support each other. But for people who have had our history taken away from us, I don't think we should take the history that we do have out of context. It wasn't that long ago. That was our grandmother's generation. They supported each other because they had to. And we have to right now. And right now, we could easily start practicing group economics. We give so much money away anyway. We could create a board of successful black business people strictly to run and help grow black businesses. We can nominate the most successful black business people to be in charge of the organization. Now make sure that they stay transparent, make sure they tell you what they're going to do, and you make sure they follow through with it. If they don't do that, stop sending your money right away. But we can all easily support that. Send $5, $10, $100, $1,000, whatever you have. And then we'll be able to put black businesses that already exist into black communities so we can support it. Or if somebody has a business idea, we don't have to go to somebody else to get a loan. We have an organization there to help him build and grow his business. And when we start building economic institutions, that'll help us build other institutions that we need. That'll help us build institutions to educate our children. Because not only are we sending our kids to their schools to learn that Christopher Columbus discovered America, now they might get shot up while they're doing it. When we have an economy, we'll be able to build institutions in order to protect us. Now, just like every other organization that's been created in order to help protect us, that will be criminalized. But they have always criminalized us.
Very few will likely be surprised by the findings of the ACLU report. The organization tracked 10 years of arrest records in 4 New Jersey towns. The study concentrated on arrests for minor offenses in 4 categories: marijuana possession, disorderly conduct, loitering, and defiant trespass.
We thought that this would be a good way to get a sense of how policing is done in neighborhoods within cities. And what we saw is that in the Black and Latino neighborhoods of particular cities, there is a much more aggressive enforcement of low-level offenses.
Resulting, says Ofer, in the perpetrators having criminal records, affecting their ability to get a job, stay in public housing, or even in some cases stay in the country. All the result of a reliance on the broken window theory of policing, which says focusing on minor offenses keeps potential major offenses from happening. The study's findings are stark. In Jersey City, blacks were 5 times and Latinos twice as likely to be arrested as whites. In Elizabeth and New Brunswick, blacks were just over 3 times as likely. In Millville, the number jumps to 6 times for blacks and 3 times for Latinos.
One of the problems that the ACLU study found was that some towns, Elizabeth particularly, didn't even track arrests for Latinos.
Which, says Ofer, reduces racial disparity records because Latinos are generally categorized then as white. One of the cities in the study that is struggling with these statistics is Jersey City, where Public Safety Director James Shea says striking a balance between checking minor offenses and concentrating on major crimes is a big part of daily police strategy.
Quite a few members of the community brought up that our police officers, while present and visible, were not engaging in these type of arrests, which they felt would break up the crowds of young people, would eliminate unsightly groups, would stop low-level marijuana smoking. This is a conversation and a challenge for policing across the United States now.
Shea, a former NYPD deputy commissioner, says he's seen broken windows work, but the price police pay in community mistrust and political fallout is too high.
To be honest, we police might have been a little tone deaf to the community and probably should have been on it a little earlier. But we've de-emphasized that type of enforcement completely. And I mean, I think if you see, New York has also, you're seeing conversations around the country about communities not being willing to tolerate that type of enforcement.
The 105-page report makes several recommendations to the Attorney General's office. Among them, demand good data management from all cities, tracking police practices, including stop and frisk, investigate other cities to see what the data there say, and de-emphasizing low-level offenses. The communities were reluctant to talk about the report, and the Attorney General's office says it's reviewing the report and the data. Everyone's seemingly in agreement that police-community relations need a reset, just not all on the same page about how to get there.
When you look at groups like the Black Panthers, they try to put them on the level as the KKK, but the Ku Klux Klan is still around today. The Black Panthers were infiltrated by the FBI. The FBI is infiltrated by KKK. The Black Panthers were born out of the civil rights movement, which they also criminalized. All the Black Panthers were doing was trying to protect the community. They were trying to feed and educate children. They were teaching people about their Second Amendment rights. And as much as they talk about gun reform laws now, that was the easiest they ever got gun laws passed. But they labeled the Black Panthers terrorists and they destroyed them. And then the Crips were born from the Black Panthers. And their main goal was to protect the neighborhood. But by then, the war on poverty and the war on drugs had started taking effect on the black community.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America. And I urge this Congress and all Americans to join with me in that effort. It will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. But we shall not rest until that war is won. The richest nation on earth can afford to win it. We cannot afford to lose it. $1,000 invested in salvaging an unemployable youth today can return $40,000 or more in his lifetime. Poverty is a national problem requiring improved national organization and support. But this attack, to be effective, must also be organized at the state and the local level and must be supported and directed by state and local efforts. For the war against poverty will not be won here in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House. The program I shall propose will emphasize this cooperative approach to help that 1/5 of all American families with incomes too small to even meet their basic needs. Our chief weapons in a more pinpointed attack will be better schools and better health and better homes and better training and better job opportunities to help more Americans, especially young Americans, escape from squalor and misery and unemployment roles where other citizens help to carry them.
And now they talk about what about black on black crime as if they didn't make the circumstances for it. But if you're going to compare trained police officers to the people that they call thugs and criminals, I'd rather have my tax money going to them because I know what their problem is. A lot of their problems come from economics. And that's why we got to find a way to keep the tax money within our own community. But you can't do that until you build your own institutions. Right now, they can just debo us and take it out before we even see our money. But if we controlled our own tax money to go into our own communities, not only just for little stuff like fixing the roads, you'll also be able to control your educational system. You'll be able to control how much teachers make. And you can get the best teachers. And we can teach kids how to be doctors and lawyers and how to invest and save and spend and what to do with their money from a young age, how to create business from a young age, how to be successful in life at a young age. Because the school we go to now is made for indoctrination, not education. But at the end of the day, whatever you do build, you have to realize they are going to come eventually. We have to learn how to protect ourselves. That is the one thing we have never been able to do. For as much as they call us violent, we have never been able to protect ourselves. And until we put aside our tribalisms and our belief systems, then we'll never be able to protect ourselves. And we'll never be on the same page.
In case you're just joining us, breaking news today in the 8-month-old case of Justine Damon. Officer Mohammed Noor now faces third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter charges in her death. As we've all learned in recent years, charges like this against police officers are rare. And as we've learned here in Minnesota last year, convictions rarely come. But we wanted to offer a little more context, so we caught up with the man who has been tracking this issue across the country for more than a decade. When explaining why it took so many months to charge Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor in the death of Justine Damon, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman cited the numbers he was up against.
We know from a study by Philip Stinson at Bowling Green State University and the Department of Justice that in the 12 years between 2005 and 2017, there's estimated to be 12,000 police-involved shootings. Of those, only 80 officers were charged with murder or manslaughter.
This case is actually the first instance that I'm aware of this year in 2018 where an officer's been charged in one of these cases.
We spoke to Philip Stinson just before he was name-dropped by Freeman, and he says to date he's now counted 85 officers charged with murder or manslaughter nationwide since 2005, and it's even more rare to see those charges stick. They've resulted in just 32 officers convicted over the same period.
And in the cases where there has been a conviction, exactly half of them have been guilty pleas and half have been jury trials.
Former St. Anthony police officer Geronimo Yanez was the first and only other Minnesota officer to face charges for a fatal on-duty shooting, but a jury acquitted him in the death of Philando Castillo. Stinson says that's common because of the amount of burden on prosecutors.
Not only do they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt in terms of the elements of the crimes that have been charged, they're also going to have to get around this whole issue of whether the officer was legally justified. In other words, I would assume if this goes to trial, the defense will bring up the issue as an affirmative defense that the officer was legally justified because he feared for his life.
Though Mohammed Noor has never spoken to investigators and does not have to testify during his trial, Stinson says based on his research, he likely will.
What we've seen in these cases, when an officer gets on the stand and testifies that they feared for their life and that's why they use deadly force, a judge and a jury, they're just very reluctant to second guess the split-second life or death decisions that officers make in potentially violent street encounters. And we just see that the officers time and time again in that type of situation are not convicted.
Though that would put more pressure on the prosecutor, he says the decision to charge Noor with both third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter could be an effective strategy, one that has only been tried 3 previous times that he knows of.
It was either reckless behavior resulting in death, or it was negligent behavior resulting in death. One of the two. And I think those are going to be easier potentially to prove in court than intentional murder, for example, would be.
What do you think this comes down to?
I've thought about this case for a long time, where a police officer shoots across the front seat of the car where their partner is sitting in the driver's seat. To me, it seems bizarre. So I would think in order to get a conviction in this case, a prosecutor is going to have that other officer who was in the cruiser, and or experts who would testify as to whether a reasonable officer would have so perceived the threat.
Now, if there's one thing Phil says he's learned over all this time studying all these cases, is that he does not want to try to predict the outcome of this, because he said juries and cases are all just so different.
Yeah, and he's specifically talking about, and what people always have to remember is it comes down to how an officer felt in a moment and if her or his life was threatened. And I don't know how this changes if we're talking about feelings.
Well,
how do you disprove a feeling?
And the one, right, but the one thing that the prosecutor I talked to today kept saying is a reasonable officer,
right.
which is like
that's what the jury has to, they'll hone in on that term, reasonable. But then again, are any of the people in the jury pool officers, so can they say what a reasonable officer does or doesn't with conviction? I don't know.
The Washington Post reports on new evidence schools in the United States are resegregating. Federal data show schools with a high percentage of poor and Black or Hispanic students climbed from 9% to 16% between 2000 and 2014. The numbers were released on the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. 62 years after that landmark Supreme Court decision, Cleveland, Mississippi faces a new federal court order to integrate. Michelle Miller is in Cleveland with why the school district may appeal. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning. Well, Cleveland school district officials contend they've made big strides since they were ordered to desegregate schools here back in 1969. But a federal judge says it wasn't enough. In fact, the school behind me was built in 1956, and nearly all of the full-time students who walked through its doors have been African American. Cleveland, Mississippi is literally a town divided by old railroad tracks. Most white students live on the west side, while many African American students call the east side home. Deshombra Fields and her brother, Quadidric, attend East Side High School, a well-regarded school where the student body is 100% Black. So you think they should not desegregate these schools?
No, ma'am.
Why?
It's this side of the highway versus that side of the highway, and it's been a rival for a long time.
Under the desegregation plan ordered by a federal judge last week, Eastside High School will be merged with Cleveland High School, where 45% of the students are white and 47% are Black. A nearly all-Black middle school would also be combined with a racially mixed one. Less than a third of the students at the new schools will be white, in a district where nearly half of residents are.
We have kids learning side by side each other of different races.
Jamie Jacks, the school district's attorney, fears the plan will spur a white flight out of public schools.
Unfortunately, when you do a mandatory reassignment plan, the results statistically tell us it's not good in terms of maintaining diversity.
This is not a country that in 2016 wants to be perceived as having deeply segregated communities anymore.
Vanita Gupta heads the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, which formulated the desegregation plan.
Children deserve to be educated in the kinds of environments that we as adults face, which are mixed race, mixed religion.
Even though Brown versus the Board of Education has been the law of the land since 1954, the Justice Department still has 177 open desegregation cases. Almost half are in just 2 states, Alabama and Mississippi. The Magnolia State has a painful history with desegregation. A deadly riot broke out in 1962 when James Meredith tried to become the first Black student enrolled at Ole Miss. Margaret Schwartzweger's kids go to Cleveland High. Edward Duvall's go to Eastside High School.
If the parents would step aside and let the kids feel their way through it, the kids are going to deal with it a lot better than the parents will.
So where do you go from here?
These kids, whether you're Black or white, are going to be our leaders for tomorrow, and we need to invest in them. It could work if we wanted to.
Well, the school district says that they believe this ruling will limit options of choice for both parents and students. They also vow to look at all options for appeal. In the meantime, the judge has given both sides 21 days to come up with a new plan for this integration.
50 years ago, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, but housing discrimination is still a huge problem in this country. According to a recent study, minority borrowers were more likely to be denied a mortgage than similar white borrowers in 61 cities across this country. Now, HUD is responsible for combating housing discrimination. And during your confirmation process, I asked you about your commitment to enforcing laws against housing discrimination, despite whatever personal feelings you had about those laws. And you said at that hearing, quote, "I will follow the law." And I remember hoping that that was true. So, Secretary Carson, it's been a year now. Can you name a few of the things you've done to reduce housing discrimination in your time at HUD?
First of all, we are constantly involved in lawsuits that we have brought against people for housing discrimination.
So are you saying you've initiated many lawsuits over the past year? Is that on discrimination issues? Is that what you're saying?
That is an ongoing process.
So you have initiated how many lawsuits over the last year?
I can't tell you how many. We can certainly get someone to follow up with you on that.
Okay, anything more?
I think that's obviously very important. The way I kind of look at it is when I talk about fair.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking you to get into your description of it. I just want to know what you've done to reduce the specific things you've done to help reduce housing discrimination. And you've said you've initiated many lawsuits and you'll get back to me on the exact number. And I just want to know other specific things you have done. Anything more?
Well, I would simply say that what we do is to try to create a fair environment for all people and all of our policies. So when we create a fair environment for everybody, that means minorities as well.
That's the question I'm asking, though, is dealing specifically with discrimination, which is the problem. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to give you a chance to make your case, because when I look at your track record at HUD, I just see you headed in the wrong direction. That is, going backwards. Mr. Secretary, a lot of people are criticizing you for spending tens of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money on fancy furniture. And don't get me wrong, I think scamming the taxpayers is a scandal. But the biggest scandal of your tenure is your unwillingness to do your job and enforce the laws that reduce housing discrimination and segregation across this country. Decades of housing discrimination have helped create an enormous wealth gap between white and black families, and the gap between white homeownership rates and black homeownership rates is 30 percentage points larger than it was back in 1968. In 1968, the typical black family had 1/6 as much wealth as the typical white family. Now it is 1/10. We have gone backwards since the civil rights era. It is HUD's job to help end housing discrimination. That's what the law said. You said you would enforce these laws. You haven't, and I think that's the scandal that should get you fired.
Well, I don't think that you have characterized things in any way close to what is accurate, but you're welcome to say whatever you want.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly wailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming in the rocket's red glare. wants to